Welcome to the Three Phase Podcast. My name is Joe Laloon, and on this episode, I'm talking with my good friend Eddie Panting about men's health and mental health, community and suicide, and how it is impacting men and families around the world. It's important to understand that the information provided in this podcast is not a substitute for professional help. If you or someone you know is in crisis or experiencing suicidal thoughts, immediate action is necessary. In Canada, you can contact Crisis Services Canada at 1-833-456-4566 or text 45645. In the United States, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available at 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255, or text HELLO to 741-741. These services offer confidential support and guidance 24/7. I hope you enjoyed the episode and conversation Eddie and I had around the subject that we feel needs to be discussed more openly. Now, let's dive into the episode.
The Three Phase Podcast is starting now.
So we are going to cover the conversation today around men's mental health, and you're coming off of a panel this summer where you got to discuss a lot of those topics, and a little intro for yourself, and probably a little bit about what qualifies you in this
Sure.
conversation.
Qualifies, yeah, we'll see what that means. But I think, as I readjust for our microphone here, so in regards to my history, I don't know if you want to call it a bio. So grew up, I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I grew up lower middle class, I guess you would say. We kind of worked our way up to lower middle class. Pretty average. We didn't grow up with much. My parents worked all the time. So I grew up in the 90s, which I know you did too, so we kind of raised ourselves.
Lock-key kid.
yeah, exactly. So, just sports was pretty much all I ever did. Sports was a big part of what I wanted to do. I was in an area, an environment where, gangs and trouble were pretty prominent, so I always felt like that was an outlet to at least keep me. I think it was honestly just my dad wanted me to not get involved with that stuff. So grew up in sports, football and martial arts mostly. Played everything as a kid, but grew up mainly focused on football and martial arts. Took those both to pretty high levels, I guess you would say. I was pretty successful in both sports, and it was great. And from there, once I was always in and out of trouble. Like football and kickboxing kept me like right on the cusp. Like all my friends were still thugs, and we were always getting into trouble. But I always had like either games or fights or things I was training for to keep me like
just on track.
Yeah, just barely on track. And then typical stuff, man. Sports ends for 99% of people who do it, right? Whether you even make it to professional levels or not, like there's always a timeline on that. So once that ended, I didn't really know what to do. I didn't have an education. I was a high school dropout. I'd only ever focused on fighting and football. That was all I ever did. And once that ended, I was still hanging out with my same friends, and I didn't have any outlets. I'm not making an excuse. It was totally my choice. So I just got back into gang life. Was pretty heavily involved in different lifestyles.
Activities.
Yeah, different activities and lifestyles, which led to a prison term and a lot of violence. Lost a lot of friends to violent deaths, murder, suicide, drug overdose, all that kind of stuff. Went to prison. I got 5 years in 2009, and when I got out, I really didn't know what to do with myself. My entire identity was either pro athlete or like gangster guy. That was just who I saw myself as all my friends were. So I got out and tried to get my life together, I found the fitness industry. So I've been in that now for 13 years. In the fitness industry, just trying to do as much as I can to help other people. Really passionate about the fitness industry. That's obviously how we met and became friends. And through that journey, in 2018, I was diagnosed with, or in 2017, I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which led to a suicide attempt in 2018. So from there, I did a lot of obviously self-development work, both with therapists and individually. I ended up working very hard on, you and I are friends for a lot of reasons, but one of them is we tend to think that we could just do it ourselves. So once I started figuring out some of the mental health side of things, I really got into the science of it. So I became certified as a clinical trauma specialist, a cognitive behavioral therapy practitioner, and what we would call like a mental health first aid practitioner, to do critical and clinical interventions with people going through trauma, and worked with a few men's groups, helping people both rehabilitate from prison, but also just people who are struggling with suicidality, depression, finding their place. So I've been doing that now for a few years. It's been very, very fulfilling. It's been very emotionally demanding to sit with people. I mean, the timing of this is a little odd. Just 2 days ago, we did a crisis intervention, and it's, you never know how they're going to go, and they're pretty emotionally taxing, obviously, to do that. But I'm fortunate, might not be the right word, but I have both the personal experience and the education to be able to help with those things. So that's what I'm really passionate about, and that's what I do now. Obviously, on top of my role in the fitness industry, is really trying to do my best to spread awareness through incredible podcasts like yours, and been on a couple other ones in this panel we just talked about, to be able to spread a little bit of messaging on what could be considered taboo subjects, specifically men's mental health, masculinity in general, suicidality in men, which is, I mean, we can talk about those stats. It's pretty staggering. Yeah, so that's what brought me here today, and I don't know if that's a qualification, but both lived experience and education to be able to do both of those things. So
yeah, I think in most fields, when someone has both those things put together, it's generally a qualifier for at least a good conversation.
Yeah, at the very least, we can talk about it.
Experience and education. Going back to your first sport, being around individuals who were high performers, both in sports and high-low performers, in the street kind of thing.
High-low performers, yeah.
Were there some individuals, whether they're coaches or teammates, who still stand out to you as people who are like shining examples of maybe leadership, because that's something you've leaned towards? Your whole process has kind of led you to this point.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate in my life in that I've had a lot of incredible men in my life. And I think that's something that not a lot of people get to have. And I know maybe we'll talk about it, maybe we won't. We tend to talk about this in our private conversations, that today's society doesn't necessarily celebrate that. And I think that leads to a lot of the troubles that we're facing for societally. But I mean, first, I'm very fortunate. My father's my hero. He's a blue-collar guy, man, just works his ass off. He still works. He's like 73, really hard-working guy, takes his word seriously. Like, those things, I grew up in that kind of culture, right? Of like, if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. If you commit to something, you're going to do it. My dad doesn't remember this, but I remember driving home from a football practice. I was like, I don't know, 11 or 12 or something, just being a bitch about it the whole time, and like, I'm going to quit. And I remember my dad just like slamming on the brakes, and he was like, we don't do that. And I was like, what? Like, I was like, I didn't even know what he was talking about. It's like, you don't quit. Like, you've committed to something, you're going to ride it out. If next year you don't want to play, fair enough. But like, you made a commitment to the other players, you made a commitment to the coach, you made a commitment to yourself, and that's who we are. Other people might quit, but we don't. And he doesn't even remember this, but it was such an impactful moment for me. because that was just me for the rest of my life. Stubborn, just getting after it. And so my father, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention him, but yeah, I had a lot of mentors. I still do, and I think that's an important thing too. I've got men in my life that I'm very that I admire personally, professionally, that kind of light the way. I think my junior football coach, legendary award-winning coach, he created a culture that was a very safe, growing environment for young men to express themselves as young men and fuck up along the way. And I think that's important too. It's like we never felt bad about who we were, but we were always made to know when we were out of line. Like that was just
like room for forgiveness, but direction.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I really think that that's an important thing is men need to learn how to be men from other men. And that's not disparaging the value of the women in our lives at all, right?
Different conversation.
Yeah, right? It's just, so I think, and I had, at the risk of sounding hokey, like, I came up on a lot of, like, real big homies, like OG guys that lived, like, old school street code, like, you're going to man up and you're going to do it. You're going to, keep your mouth shut and do your time. You're like, you made the choices you made. Like all that kind of, which I know sounds counterproductive, but, both in the sports world, in the professional world, and in the criminal world, I always had people to look up to for whatever that means. But I had people that were schooling me on what it takes and how you should conduct yourself, when you call yourself a man and what that means to represent in whatever category you're in. And I don't mean necessarily like traditional male values in that necessarily, like you don't have to like wear plaid and be a lumberjack or whatever, but like, just how you conduct yourself. And I think that, I can think of a few people. I don't know if we want to like get into their names and everything else, but
I think the commonality with those three buckets of people is that they all had a code, whether good or bad, and they all had like an ethos that they stuck to, and they were so sure of it that they were confident to pass it on to you.
100%.
And I think, we can get more into this too, but it's like at this day and age, a lot of people, they don't even know what they stand for, and a lot of the time they're just regurgitating someone else's thoughts and ideas, and so the confidence in those codes or ethos are already pretty fuzzy. And so the takeaway from most young men who are learning from older men who don't even know what they stand for, it just gets more and more muddled the more it gets passed down. And I think from our age group and the age group above us, like our parents who are boomers, those are even more steadfast in their codes and their ethos. So like they knew, like, you're going to get a hardworking job, you're going to raise a family, you're going to own a car, truck, vehicle, and you're going to stand for something. Fly a flag in your front yard, whatever it is. They really knew what to stand for, and they pass that on. And for good or for bad, you can argue the gray, matter of that. But I think that, like, for you, those commonalities, and then probably from that, those three buckets, you're able to kind of figure out, like, what's going to actually work for you. Like, can I take from here? Can I take from here and create my own thing? And that's like where your expression of self comes, and has been developed, and probably were pulled in lots of different directions at first, but now are more so in a position that you want to be in.
I couldn't agree more, man. I think that there's that old saying, if you stand for nothing, you fall for anything, or everything, however that goes. But I really believe that, though, right? Like I grew up in an area, in an era, in a community where there was principles, right? Like there was things you stood by, and I think that's important. I think it's important for everybody, not just men. But I think you absolutely nailed it. Is we're kind of in a time where people, like you said, don't really know what they stand for. They're wishy-washy in their values. They don't, whether that's they're afraid to be on the wrong side of something, or it's like, like, how can you expect other people to listen to you when you don't even listen to yourself, right? It's like, if you don't know who you are, how can you make any type of positive impact on any of your community, your loved ones, anything else? It's like, and I was fortunate to be pretty confident with who I am as a person, or at least my value system, really early. Like really early, I knew at least what I didn't stand for.
Right.
And I think that's important too. It's you grow up, your values change as we age. We're family guys. All this stuff changes, but I at least knew who I didn't want to be.
Right.
And that was, I think, important. And that alone, I think, is just such a gap for a lot of people, as they're getting so many mixed messages in so many different capacities. They don't really know what's true. There's so many charlatans out there, like you said, just regurgitating stuff from other people, and if you're regurgitating, not that you can't find value in other people's messages that you want to promote, of course, right? But it
doesn't always seem like there's been a full thought process to make the information your own.
Yeah, and how are you even applying that information? How does that information even affect you in your life, right? Because if you're listening to every podcast in the world, and you're reading every self-development book, and you're doing all the the self-development, self-mastery stuff that people talk about, and it's like, but you're not doing it, and you're not making yourself better, you're not making your community better, it's kind of just like, shut up.
It's all for naught.
Yeah, it's like, what's the point of that, right?
I think lately too, like a big challenge in the men's health, or just men's sort of sector of things, is this like being beaten down a little bit with male identity.
Yeah.
And I think let's probably have some points on this that we want to go through. Is just that the things that make men masculine aren't toxic.
Yes.
But unfortunately, most men who are masculine have been made to feel that way.
Sure.
And that's again, like kind of going back to standing tall and speaking clear about what your message might actually be, that could actually like move yourself, your family, your community forward. People are holding back off a lot of that because they just don't want to be in the wrong. And that's fair. Like you don't always have to be combative and confrontational.
Sure.
But especially in the last 5 years, it feels like any message that comes from a man's mouth, it could be the most supportive thing ever, is still going to be discouraged or questioned or challenged. And for men's mental health, I'll let you run with that, is just kind of like spinning off of that kind of put down and how men have been forced to deal with that when we have been taught to man up.
Yeah, I think obviously you're opening Pandora's box there with a few different points. If we're going to start on the mental health side of things, like I talk about this a lot, so at the risk of sounding redundant if you've heard other things that I've talked on, but it's men need purpose, right? That we're purpose-driven creatures. And of course I'm generalizing, not every man is the same, but the reality is we tend to lean into purpose, right? So when we're talking about leaning into purpose, and if society, if people around you, if a community is making it feel like you don't have a purpose, or your purpose is net negative, and how it's like, then you can't find a purpose because you're so scared of being yourself, of expressing any of those traditional masculine traits or whatever that people might consider toxic. Well, now you've got a whole generation or a whole demographic of men that don't feel connection to their community, they don't feel connection to themselves, they don't feel connection to other men. There's dramatic shift in isolation in young men specifically, right? They don't know how to connect with other men. That's made to seem like that's a bad thing. It's made to seem like, bro culture is bad. It's like, and I'm not saying there aren't negative aspects to anything, but people are people, right? We're pretty fallible. So there's going to be negative, toxic aspects to bro culture, 100%. But there's toxic aspects to anything, any relationship, right? And then obviously positive things. And I think when we're talking about the mental health side of things, suicide is the number 2 leading cause of death for men, and that's pretty wild in Canada, right? Like that's pretty insane. Men are 4 times more likely to kill themselves than women. We take up like 75% to 80% of all suicides are men. And the numbers actually increase as you get older. And one of the things that studies are suggesting and researchers are suggesting is you see a big gap in men lose their job, right? It's high risk of suicide. Like men who have a career, high risk of suicide, going through divorce, losing their family. Those types of things, obviously trauma, unaddressed trauma, because we're not taught how to be, I'm saying we're not taught, our generation specifically wasn't taught to even talk about feelings. I mean, we can talk more in depth about that as we go, but that was a big struggle I had, right? So, which compounds those problems. But back to the thing about purpose that you were saying is, we're seeing these suicide rates just become exponentially higher. They're growing every year. Obviously the isolation from pandemic and all that stuff added to it. As you said, social pressures, talking about, I'll read things on Canadian and US college campuses where men are dropping out at record rates, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. 2, many studies are now showing and polls are showing like young men are terrified to even go up and say hi to a young woman, right? Because that could be perceived as aggression, or that could be perceived, and I'm not talking about hollering at girls as they walk by on the street. I mean,
respectfully.
Respectfully approaching somebody and trying to get to know people, right? It's so all these things are compounding and creating an environment, exactly like you said, where men are not feeling confident and competent in their ability to be themselves. And it's so much so that they don't even know who themselves are. Like they don't even have as you said, an ethos, something to live by. They're just getting these mixed signals and they recede into themselves, and then you've got this online incel culture that builds and the women hate, which then perpetuates some of the language being used in wider society of like, men are being X, Y, and Z. It's like, is it chicken or the egg? Are they being pushed into behaving that way, right? So I've talked in the past about, and this isn't a judgment call, it's not about the people, but there's a lot of pushback on people like the Liver King or Andrew Tate, like those type of characters. And I don't personally think they're the problem. I think they're a symptom of a problem, right? That it's when there aren't positive male role models that are celebrated and showed as examples of at least an option of who you can be, right?
The extreme standout.
Yeah, exactly. And anytime there's a void in anything, then the loudest person in the room is going to fill that void, right? And I think now you're getting young men that are just so confused as to what they should stand for, what things mean. As you said, they're driven in some cases into fear, right, to even express their values, right? That can turn against them. So obviously there's not a simple fix for that, but I think at least being able to have these type of conversations and creating space for people to at least talk about these things. It's like, these are challenges young men are facing. Young men are a big part of our future as a society, right? So we need to make sure they're taken care of, and they're killing themselves at an astronomical rate. And then men in their 50s and 60s are doing the same. Those numbers are increasing dramatically, even into seniors, right? Because they feel like they've lost a sense of purpose. They don't have a job. They don't have a family to take care of. They don't have a purpose, a reason to live. I'm not trying to ramble too much, but that also goes into how we treat those things as well. Western therapy, in my estimation, is not geared very well towards the male brain and male needs when it comes to therapy. Most men would rather kill themselves than view themselves or think society views them as weak or having no purpose.
Right, because they start to feel like a burden at that point,
100%.
and rather than feeling like a burden, they'd rather ease the suffering of everyone around
100%.
them. But ultimately, what would be more beneficial, obviously this is a not a solution or suggestion either, is that to have men like that kind of go through the storm, come out the other side, and be great leaders for other people in that situation, like yourself. And that's way more easier said than done. And I know I'm being naive with that statement, but the characters that come out of those situations, but it takes so many things. It takes some support from other individuals, from community, from like structures and systems in place to make sure that people are being engaged and brought in and given a new purpose or coached to a new purpose or something along those lines. And it's definitely not the situation you want to be seeing so frequently, where men do feel like they're actually doing something positive by ending their lives. And it's never going to be that thing. They just need a different direction to go and something to go towards, because like you said, when you look through that lens of being purpose driven, it makes so much sense, right? And it's job loss, divorce, and also like even friendship loss, right? In older ages, men who don't have a friend group are exponentially more likely to commit suicide as well, because they just don't have the community support that they need to feel engaged and feel connected. And that goes back to the isolation aspect of it. And for these younger kids who are really, this is going to sound like an old man statement, in this computer era and spending most time on phones and computers, gaming consoles, whatever, they have no human connection to even go to someone if they were feeling like that or they felt like they needed support. There's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to turn. They haven't actually made those connections to work through it with someone.
Yeah, that's a really astute point, right? Like when however you get to that position of not having those intimate male relationships, then, as you said, like if you are going through something, you don't even know where to go. Mm-hmm. You have no idea what to even do about it, right? Would you message your Xbox friend that you've never met, that you play something? I love Xbox, let's be clear. But like you said, it's like you're not going to message somebody you've played video games with a couple times. Like that's
who could live anywhere.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like you need those intimate male relationships are deeply important when you look at history and how society has been built, just in general in human evolution. There has always been strong male intimate relationships, right? In regards to from hunting parties to war bands to, I'm using kind of aggressive examples, but it's been really important, right? Is having that circle of men. And I think that's something that team sports did for me, and I think did for a lot of us, yourself included, where you kind of, you're going through, especially if it's a physical sport, it's like you go through these little mini organized battles, right? With your brothers in arms there, and you build stronger relationships. Like I'm still very good friends with people. I'm turning 39. Guys that I play ball with. Like I'm fortunate. Some of my best friends that I'm still in regular contact with, I've had my whole life. Like since like a teenager, like my high school buddies, I'm still have those friends. Life. Yeah, because of those relationships that we built when we were young, right? Whether it was getting into trouble or playing sports together or just going through the shit, you build those strong bonds, and even that, right? Like, organized sport in our country has been really taking a back seat in a lot of ways. For men and women, like young women as well, right? I think for them too, building those communities of people that you're going through some struggle with, right? Those are the best relationships I've ever had in my life. Right? Yeah,
I was back at my university over the weekend and reconnected with 30 of my teammates and teammates that I live with as well. I was talking to them kind of aside, and we were both just saying, it's a bit sad that we don't get to see each other. One of them lives in Halifax, one lives in Toronto, one lives in Vancouver, and no matter how good your new relationships are with friends that you've met along the way, like those brothers that you've spent that much intimate time with in buses, on teams, in battles, in hotel rooms, in your house, on airplanes, you've lived with those guys specifically for 5 years for me, and we're just kind of saying it's not something you could replicate because you've been through so many different things together. You've had those opportunities to sit and talk and communicate and talk about relationships and talk about grandparents passing away and whatever it is, just having that support system in place. that, you know, new friendships are awesome and important, and if you want to keep fostering them and building new ones, but some of those ones are really unique, and they're hard to replicate and find other situations like that. And that's a bit of going through struggle together, but also having enough downtime together where you can be intimate and talk about some real shit.
Yeah. But like, I can't remember the statistic exactly, so I'm paraphrasing, but only slightly. But in the high 70s to 80s, maybe even more now, percentages of when men are asked, like adult men, however you want to classify, I think it was like 30 plus or 35 plus, of like how many people in their life would they count as like a best friend, and it was like less than 2. In some cases it was like I've got like the friends, our neighbors that the wife and I talk to, and I can't even wrap my head around that. Like I couldn't imagine living that way, and I don't mean that disparagingly. Like it just seems heartbreaking to me, right? To not have people that genuinely want your best interests, that genuinely care about you, that genuinely will hold you accountable, that want to see you doing the best for yourself, that won't put up with your bullshit, that'll call you out on stuff. Like those, I don't know, that, like, to me, that's such a big part of the human experience, especially for a man, is to have that tribe. You know, those people that push you to be better, and that you can go to when times are tough, right? And that's, so many people don't have that, and I find that so heartbreaking when you read those statistics or you talk to people that they're just like, I've literally no friends. Like, I've got guys that I work with, but I don't have like any close friend that I'm excited to see, and we've got a history together, and I think that's such a big gap. But until we start having more of these conversations and creating communities that are for men, but that's a specific problem in of itself, right? Is that for us to have, I hate the term, but like safe spaces for men to just be men, until that's brought back into being acceptable in society, we're going to keep ostracizing and isolating those people. And then the same problems that we're facing now with the isolation, the suicidality, the problems that we see, these so deeply angry, like online personalities that are espousing hate. It's like those are symptoms of a problem, right? Those are symptoms, and until we can talk about the symptoms, but we tend to focus on those of like, look what's happening, and these people are bad, and it's like, sure, they're behaving badly. Not to excuse their behavior, but like, why are they in the situation that they're in? Why does this guy who's espousing hate online, let's say, or saying awful things or whatever, right? It's like, what's going on in his life? Why doesn't he have another man around him being like, hey, straighten out? Right? Like, go do something with yourself. But those people who don't have purpose, which is exactly what that is, they're people who have no identity, they have no ethos, as you said, to live by, they have no purpose, and they don't have anyone that can show them what that looks like, then that's what you get. For men and women, like in any capacity, but and then
they're being propped up by other men in that same situation because they feel the same way, but they don't have the bravery to act that way. And I mean, brave is not smart, for the record.
Indeed.
With the like men's groups, I think this is kind of just an interesting thing, is when you start to look at like where men convene most often, is around things that now unfortunately have been deemed like these sort of toxic environments. But really, if we kind of look at it for what it is, it's just a space that men get together because they have something in common. So the examples I'm thinking of are like a football tailgate, bringing your friends over to watch sports, going to golf together, usually like related to sports because it's not, frowned upon by other
not yet
toxically masculine men. But it's a space that is their own, and most of their friends will convene in the same area, and even if they're not friends, they at least have one thing in common. And I mean, that stuff needs to be propped up and available. It doesn't need to lead to debauchery.
Of course.
But it should be available for people to show up and do that. And for us, where I was kind of going with this was like going to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And when I first moved to Winnipeg, like I had some mutual friends through my wife who's from here, but I didn't know anybody here. And so I met you through work.
Yeah.
And those sort of characteristics that you talk about that make a good friend, that are going to keep you accountable, call you out, prop you up, push you to be better. You had all those, and I was able to have those through sports. So I sought that out naturally, right? That's what I know is good friendship. And so I started weightlifting because that was like the first thing that I did that felt like that community again of, people who are like-minded. They wanted to get better. They wanted to keep you accountable. They wanted to push you. But then when I shifted, I still do weightlifting, but I shifted to jiu-jitsu, that's like a whole other level of that, because you're in contact with each other physically.
Yeah.
So, obviously with weightlifting, just you in a bar, it'll try to crush you too, but it's not talking very often. Whereas like jiu-jitsu, you're sitting together, I think, which is like an interesting thing. You're not standing cross arms, you're sitting on the floor together, you're looking each other in the eye, you're talking, communicating, you're challenging each other to the max. And you are learning constantly and being pushed and also being accountable. Like we text each other all the time, like, are you going today? I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks, you got to get there. And I think it's a big thing to the point where it sort of has become a meme. Like jiu-jitsu has sort of become a meme, but honestly, if you do it, especially if you're a man doing it, it is a great environment for a lot of people who have an ethos.
Yes.
People who want to improve, people who want to show up and get better, whether there's an outcome or not, which is sort of the coolest part for me. And that's like why I wanted to get into it, is like I just wanted something to show up to with the intention of improving, with no like goal of an outcome.
Yeah, sure. Well, jiu-jitsu is so complicated you can't even have an outcome. I think not only are you going to be there with, well, first of all, if you're listening to this podcast and you don't do jiu-jitsu or any other combat sport, please go do that. You will build bonds that you cannot find in other scenarios. I really believe that. Even if you're just going to a boxing class, even like I teach boxing, but you don't have to like spar other people, but just going through hard shit with other people immediately builds bonds. By choice, yes. Well, there's also trauma bonding, I guess, but yeah, choosing to go through challenges. Jiu-jitsu is, obviously we're both really passionate about it, and you said you find other people with like-minded ethos and people who are willing to challenge themselves, and you're 100% true. And I think it's also a place where you can go to find your ethos too. Like if you don't have a purpose and you don't, like we found it because we share those traits and we're seeking those out actively. Like where can we go do these things? But if you don't have those, it's learnable. Like we were ingrained, we learned those belief systems and those values. Yeah. You can find that, right? So whether it's hard, and I really believe men, and it doesn't matter how you express yourself as a man. Like you don't have to be like the jock guy. You don't have, like, it's not that. It's not at all. It's just find something challenging, physically demanding, and go try. And you're going to meet people who are in similar positions as you and who have either, one, been through it or are the other side, who can guide you. And you're also going to have the people who are brand new with you that you can suffer together. And that's such an important thing. And, we were talking about finding communities, and I think one thing people don't really understand is, this is going to sound odd. I'm an executive in a company and I've got like a very positive life and doing the right things, but like I still have friends that are still doing their thing, and they're always going to be my friends. Yeah. And I respect them. And I mean when I say that, I respect them as men. I don't have to agree with every decision they're making, but like I respect them as men very much. And that's controversial in some cases to say, right? But I do, and it's like when specifically, like martial arts, I competed at a very high level in kickboxing specifically, and it's still like it's team, but it's still individual. Jiu-jitsu is way more team oriented than like striking sports for sure. But I think of like when football ended and I had these super strong bonds, and I was just used to going to war every Saturday with the guys, and I came back and it's like, why do you think people join gangs? I was in my 20s. Like, I'd always been on the periphery of it, but like when I really got involved super heavily, I was like a young adult, right? But it filled a void. It filled a void of like those intimate relationships of like, these are people I'm going to war with, these are people I'm spending all my time with, these are men that I'm like, one thing, that lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, again, I'm not excusing behavior. I'm just saying people don't talk about it with any type of lens of why it exists and the reality with it, right? It's an important feeling to not just like, oh, my friends have my back, but like knowing you have theirs. Like knowing that like I will lay my life down for these guys. And some have, and some have almost had their lives taken or taken other lives, which I'm not championing or glorifying, but like that builds bonds and it fills a void in people, right? So it's whether it's a team sport or jiu-jitsu, I'm not saying go join a gang, go join jiu-jitsu instead, but that's why those things exist. Right? There aren't roving packs of female gangs, statistically speaking.
I think too, for the stats of who joins gang, it's like, I'm not going to know the percentage, I won't even try, but like boys and men who join come from single parent homes, and they don't have a male figure in place who's going to steer them in the right direction, or even just, you know, like we've said a few times, like give them some purpose and direction to go after something specific or follow in their footsteps or whatever. And it's a high, maybe you know the percentage more.
Yeah, it's a lot. Like I'm a bit of a statistic anomaly when it comes to that, because my parents are the nicest people. they're such amazing good people, and I put them through the ringer. But yeah, I mean, I think to a lot of my friends, they had poor relationships with their fathers, or if any relationship at all, right? Or it was an abusive relationship. It was, you know, whatever, there's substance abuse in the household. Some type of trauma. Yeah, exactly, right? And for me, it was less that. It was none of that. I didn't have any childhood trauma. But it was a need, like I'm an only child, so it was a need to be a part of something and to feel. I was addicted to the feeling of brotherhood, very much. Like I always thought I would either end up in prison or in a war zone, like that. I just my whole life.
You're born at a different time.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I'm either joining the military, which my father's family is a heavy military family. It's like I'm either going that route, or it's like I'm going to be thugging with my friends forever, you know. Which one of those came true? But so it's replacing a need. Again, the gang culture. I know we're not talking. This isn't a podcast about gangs, but like to me, it's not a surprise when I look back, even to my friends that are still involved with that kind of life, life outside the law. We'll say, however you want to talk about that. And for young, like it's 90+% men, right? Like so astronomically compared to young women, right? And so that right there, it's like, okay, well that's got to mean something. That's got to mean something that we've got all these men that are in a position where they're seeking something, they're trying to fill that void, right? Whether it's filling trauma or substance, like whatever the reason, or that brotherhood, that sense of need, of purpose, being together, right? And even though it's a negative purpose, it does fill a need of purpose.
But you can parallel the military 100%. In the same way, right? The vast majority of people in the military are male. I don't know the psychology on what family life is like, but probably lots of former military as well who are driving home that message of, this is a good purpose. This is going to be something that's like protective, and you're providing safety for not only you and your family, but your country. And so there's a passed down reason to be in that position. But again, it's mostly men because they want to be attached to purpose and attached to brotherhood. And it's kind of, it's genetically bound to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's societally we're as we started this off, is like we're in a position in time right now where any of those traditional male values are being looked at as problematic. And I'm so cognizant of that, as I know exactly where that leads. And so many people do. There's, so many people talking about this that are much more intelligent and eloquent than I am, but it's not hard to parse this out where this ends, right? Because we have the data, right? Since this trend started to happen in the last decade, we'll say, but as you said, specifically really in the last 5-6 years, since that the more toxic masculinity, this language is being used, bro culture, rape culture, that like all these things has started to, man, there was an article in like the Washington Post or New York Times like a month ago that fitness is white supremacy. It's like, I'm not making a political statement, but it's like those types of things, when you've got young men, like as you said, going to places to try and build communities, going to like work out and better themselves, and then they're like, oh man, that means I'm racist, I can't do that. It's like all those little things that we put out there, now that we've got the data to show what's happening, and it's that men are killing themselves at record rates. That's a fact. So it's like, okay, well, if we know what we've been doing, and now we have data to see the result of those things, maybe we can stop talking about like potential threats about toxic masculinity and a bunch of guys being dudes is a big problem. It's like, okay, how can we do that in a healthy fashion? How can we promote the healthy side of all those things?
And I think too, like everything is kind of on a bell curve as well, right? And a lot of those media sources are going to do what they can to get clicks. And so what they do is they highlight both ends of that bell curve.
Exactly.
So they're going to show the people who are literally toxic men, like men who other men are like, that guy is quite a loser. And, or the total other end of that, someone who they highlight, whatever the other thing could be, but there's not a lot of spotlight on the center of the bell, where most men are doing, if they're in a gym, they're not white supremacists. They're there to better their health, their fitness, their mental health, their physique, whatever it is. Men who are traveling in groups, they highlight obviously the bad ones who are causing crime and destruction. But most men who travel in groups are, going to, family barbecue.
Yeah,
or
they're not raping and pillaging their way across.
They're walking to a soccer game or something like that. Like, they're not causing trouble, but that doesn't get clicks. And I think, especially for young men who are maybe only seeing these sort of media outlet sources, then they're interpreting that like, well, I don't want to be in a group of guys, so I'll just stay by myself. And I don't want to go to the gym and better myself, so I guess I'll just stay home. And so it just like drives home that like insular, locked in a basement man who is not going to develop, he's not going to have purpose, he's not going to have community, and he's just going to be in a position where the next option for him is just to end it all, because there's no reason to be here if he can't do any of these things that actually make him feel good, fulfilled, and purposeful and progressive.
Yeah, or even worse, harm other people. Right, which we're seeing more and more as well, right? And I think that it's not society's fault that people are ill. It's not society's fault that somebody does some horrific act of violence or kills themselves or whatever, because that's too broad and that's such a general cop-out. But there's aspects of society that, as you said, don't promote the healthy side of a lot of things, for whatever reason. We know that, clicks and money and revenue and everything else, but when you don't have those outlets and you don't have, again, examples of what that could look like, when you don't have examples of people, one, if we don't create a space where people can openly talk about things. So I was part of a discussion on a similar topic, and one of the questions that was posed to us was, how can men be better, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, how can men be better allies to the women in their lives and help dismantle the patriarchy? And I was like, name one time where there's been a celebration of women, where women are on a panel talking about their successes and trials and tribulations, what it's like to be a woman, and what made them successful, and these like incredible women leaders. And I'm very fortunate to be in a company that's like, our leadership is hopefully they take this as flattering as I mean. It's like, it's badass women. Like they run shit, run it well, and they're amazing. And in our industry as well, like the fitness industry has just people in general that are super incredible. But my point was like, when has there been a space where women are talking about that? Imagine me going in and being like, well, how are you going to be a better wife to your husband? It's like, people would lose their minds, and rightfully so. They should be like, what? This is our, get out of here, right? So, but just the fact that the purpose of the discussion was to create a safe space for men to be able to talk about challenges that men are facing in society, and that question got injected. And it's like, well, this is what shuts down the conversation. This immediately makes most of the men that are in this room, which is exactly what happened, you could see them recede into themselves. Like, oh, the patriarchy, and oh, I need to be an ally.
Be a part of that.
Well, and it's like, and they don't want to say anything now because they're scared they're going to say the wrong thing.
Right.
And there's a few of us that are open about those conversations that pushed back on that. Not pushing back on it has nothing to do with my personal belief of any of that question. It's just about those questions being thrown in all the time legitimately create self-censorship. And when people are self-censoring, that's when they recede into themselves. That's when they completely disconnect from community, because then they start to view community as a whole as that's going to come up, right? And they're like, well, I don't want to. And man, people don't want to be outside of the herd. We've studied this since the beginning of human civilization, right? We know that it's quote unquote bad to be outside of the tribe, because you would die. Like, you would die. The tribe would be like, ugh, gross. And then you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die. So there's an inherent genetic need for humans. We're tribal, to stay with the herd. So, but when the herd even
starts running towards a cliff.
Yes, and even if it's a very small minority of the herd that's very loud, that's throwing those propositions out, people in that herd are just like, oh, they're pretty loud. Just in case everyone feels that way, I'm not going to say anything. Right? So, and that's what I'm finding a lot. Now, I shouldn't. In very recent history, these conversations, and I mean like within the last year for me personally, these conversations are coming up more and more, and we're creating, people like yourself that are willing to give space on your platform to have these discussions. Not with myself. I know you've had plenty of guests talking about similar things. That alone is a big step, to just have open, honest conversation about, hey, these are pros, cons, feel free to disagree. We can talk about it. It's, I think that's another big point, is just the genuine understanding of what empathy is, which I think people don't really understand, right? It's like, empathy is I don't have to agree with you. I don't even have to like you as a person. I'm just trying to see something through your eyes, right? I think Louis C.K. has this incredible bit where he's talking about abortion clinics, and one little piece of it, he's like, but like the pro-life people think you're killing babies in there. Like, that's what they think is happening, and they're so upset. And he's laughing about it, but it's like, oh, I don't have to agree with you. I just need to take a step back and see things through your eyes. How can this person view this, right? So if we can give a little bit more empathy to each other, especially in the cases of what's happening with men, because again, I can't stress this enough, like, men are 3 times less likely to seek help when it comes to mental health issues. men over 65 are 9 times more likely to kill themselves than women.
Right.
As I said before, under the age of 50, it's the second leading cause of death. Like, let's not brush past that.
Yeah.
The second leading cause of death
And if
is
you look,
suicide.
And you look at sort of global leaders in death, it's like car accidents and heart disease. But if you narrow in on men, it's
suicide.
heart disease and suicide, or
Yep.
whatever number 1 is.
Yeah, and 3 is like accidental death. But a lot of the data around suicide is pretty vague, right? Because a lot of men go through with suicide at a dramatically higher rate than women.
Right.
Dramatically higher. You typically will see women will talk about it more, suicidal ideation, but then they'll kind of express it a little bit more, and then help can come quicker. Men will just go do it.
Right.
So I can speak for myself. Like, I never once said I was like, I don't want to be here. I never talked about anything.
Right.
I just
It's all
went
internal dialogue.
Yeah, and then it went and tried to go through with it. So there was no quote unquote cry for help that's common, or that people think is common. And with men are also exposed to trauma at a dramatically higher rate. So one, just societal violence, like we talked about, gang violence, physical violence actually tends to happen more from like abusive fathers to their sons than it does from fathers to daughters. That, not necessarily sexual violence, of course, but just violence in general. Between 90 and 93% of the 4 most dangerous jobs in the world are men, like populated by men. Over 90% of just all dangerous aspects of jobs in general are men. Men are like 400 times more likely to die on the job than women. So when you start parsing that out through society, it's like, okay, we've got all these instances where men are more likely to face trauma in their life, like by a lot. And not saying, again, 2 things could be true at once. Women absolutely face trauma, and in a different capacity, right? But we've got men that are so often coming across trauma, and then 3 times less likely to seek help for that, and 4 times more likely to commit suicide, and 70, like when you start parsing out the numbers, it's staggering. Yeah, and it's very obvious of how that ends. Like you could follow from point A all the way to Z of like, these are the stages of how we get to the suicide rates that we're at.
Yeah.
And not to just focus on the suicide thing, that's obviously the extreme end of it, but that's where it ends. And we got to make sure that we're talking about how that happens, right? That substance abuse is dramatically higher in men. Men will typically not seek out therapy. They will not. And so, going back to your point, if men don't have those other male intimate relationships, if they don't have people they can talk to, and they don't seek out therapy, it's like, well, that's the end of that.
Yeah.
There is no solution there. Same thing, like calling suicide hotlines, crisis lines, very low numbers for men in comparison to women. So there's all these, it's a perfect storm for the suicide issue, the isolation, insulation from society. That's how we get there, right? So I think we're in a position now where we have to take responsibility as men with any type of platform, with any type of experience, leadership qualities that can give to our communities, and specifically our male communities of any age, of being those examples of what people need, letting people know, like young men, that it's like, man, you can fuck up all the time. As long as it matters to you that you did, and you're working hard to change that and not make those same mistakes, it's going to turn out okay. Generally speaking. You don't have to be perfect at anything. In fact, nobody is, and anybody who's online telling you they are is an asshole. Right? So it's like, you can see all these, but I really believe that. I really believe we have a responsibility, people like yourself, people like myself, that are fortunate enough to have platforms, and whatever that means. For you, obviously, you have a huge social media reach. You work with clients one-on-one. You're a leader in our local community when it comes to fitness. And obviously your podcast, your media reaches a lot farther than obviously our local community. people like us that have any opportunity to be able to speak about these things and speak about them in a real manner and not shy away from some of the realities of where things are at, for letting people know if they are feeling suicidal or ideal, you know, it's like there's ways you can get out of that, right? There's ways you can communicate with other people. There's groups. There's, as you said, like, you know, combat sports was something you picked up in your 30s.
Yeah, never did any martial art in my life.
Yeah, like, that's not an easy thing to just like, well, I'm gonna go get the shit kicked out of me for a few years here until I get better at it.
Yeah. I had a good, I'll kind of double back, but I just, as we're on the topic, like I had one of the guys who joined our club, and you know, was definitely someone who was not athletic, probably spent a lot of the time in the basement playing video games on a computer, was not taking care of himself, was overweight, very shy, you know, all those kind of like internalizing all of his male characteristics. Came to the club, and you know, I don't even think he knew how to talk to anybody, honestly. Like, he barely introduced himself. He was kind of pushed a little bit to introduce himself. Yeah. And he's just someone who kept showing up every day, and then he started spending his computer time or whatever, watching videos, getting better. He got a gym membership, started working out. He lost like 50 pounds in 5 months. He is going to community events. He's out in public. He's helping, you know, get engaged in judging and scorekeeping. We both started at the same time. We both started in January last year. And the character change in like 6 months for this one guy was so dramatic. I was like, I made a note of it. I was like, this is exactly what this is here for. Yeah. This guy probably has never really had a strong leader in his life. And the cool thing about martial arts is, like, the belt system of it is that you know exactly who the leader is. They got a black belt on, and it's got a bunch of stripes on it. Talk to that guy, because they've been through it. They know how to get there, and they've been put in a position to lead based on their expertise. So it's very obvious who that is. And then as you spend time in that environment, it's also really easy to pick up the secondary leaders. You know who they are. They stand out, they get pulled in for demonstrations, they're always asking questions and looking to get better themselves. And I just thought he is such a good example of someone who literally went from, like, you know, this caterpillar who is just kind of there, just kind of occupying space in his life, who really transformed himself in a very short period of time. But I think because that environment allows it, it gives the right structure, it gives the right leadership, it gives the right direction, it gives purpose, right? And then you could take all those things and apply it to stuff that you can become responsible for. So no one told him to go get a gym membership.
That's a good point.
He said, if I was in better fitness, if I was more fit, I could do better at this thing. So he got a gym membership. He took responsibility, where previously in his life, he probably took no responsibility at all. You know, maybe he was coddled. Maybe everything was given to him. He never had to work hard. This was an opportunity for him to seek out hard things, improve on them, and then fill in the gaps through responsibility. And for other men in other situations, that combination is really hard to come by. And if you never played sports growing up, because I know for me, most of my life lessons came from sports and coaches, whether it was like teammates or scenarios or just coaching opportunities. And for people who never had that, and then maybe never had a father figure in their life, they're just starting at such a disadvantage. And then when you throw in those societal measures of not letting men, be themselves for whatever that is, that really is just gasoline on this sort of traceable trend, is the point I was trying to get at. It's like, we know that it's like these are like stacked traumas, they're isolated, they're, put in these situations, and it always leads, 90% of the time, it leads to the same thing. And I think this is just a kind of a global issue, and this isn't this isn't a solution, but we tend to, maybe not me personally, but they tend to just look at the problem or the outcome and slap a Band-Aid on it.
Yes.
Right? And say like, oh, that's just, it's a male trait to commit suicide. It's like, no, it's absolutely not. It's a traceable thing that we could actually look back to the root and try to improve that.
Yeah.
And that's just not happening. And it's, it's a parallel, because this is kind of a fitness podcast, but is like, someone who's overweight is not because of the last thing they ate. It's because they have been continuously overeating and not exercising for a long period of time. And if we look at the root of that and try to improve it, then the outcome is different.
Yeah.
But we are such a Band-Aid on a wound type of society that it does take male leadership and male responsibility to say, hang on, everybody take a second. What's the root of this, and how can we actually make a difference? What can we do to change things so that we don't keep ending up in the same outcome?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and that's a cool way of putting it. Yeah, with like a weight loss or struggling with that, it didn't happen overnight, right? And that's the stuff with the men exactly. Like, have you ever tried to like, where do you see yourself now? Obviously, you're a successful fitness professional, successful in your media spaces. You're a dad. You've got a great family. Like, where's Joe without lacrosse? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you even?
No, because it's such like a character root for me.
Yeah.
Because I started, when I was 10, and I played sports forever, and I've been around that for a long time. But, my dad was my coach. My uncle was my coach. Mm-hmm. One of our great family friends who was a firefighter and basically played sports at pro level, he was a coach. I had most of them were just like these great men who were really masculine in their own way. Mm-hmm. Coaches I had a junior coach who battled stage 4 cancer and came through the other end. Like, that's the characters that I was around. That's a strong male character to go through something like that. And these were the guys that I always emulated and looked up to, and sort of knew that was a good standard to work towards.
Yeah.
And then the sport aspect of it is that idea of it's a battle. You're basically those are your generals at war. Mm-hmm. And the guys who kind of get through usually are paying attention to what the generals are doing and saying. Yeah. And maybe I would have found other ways to be myself too, I'm sure, but I just find the amount of times I think about moments in sports or moments with coaches or conversations that I had, on the sideline or not on the sideline, and how often I reference those, whether it's out loud or just to myself. There's no way I would be where I am now. Even just, my general work ethic comes from sports, and the conversations I have with myself when I'm not feeling like doing the work is always about just showing up and doing the work, right? It's just how do I reframe a thought process to have a more positive outcome? Mm-hmm. Because in sports, you're always trying to do that.
Yeah.
You come off a loss, okay, how do we turn this around and make it a win? Or you have a bad game as an individual, how do you spin this and make yourself a better athlete the next time? And, just that alone is, learned responsibility.
Yeah.
To answer.
No, dude, that's why I asked. I think about that as we age. I think about that more and more of who would I even be if I didn't have those character traits that were instilled in me when I was so young, through sport. I'm in a leadership position in my company, and which I'm very lucky and privileged to have. So I get to have some influence over how things go in the development of young people in my company. Young, I mean young in the industry. And 90% of the way I interact with people and the way I coach and the way I lead is just mimicking the best coaches I've ever had.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just if it worked for me and I enjoyed it so much, there's got to be some value in it, right? I think maybe I'm just getting old and missing the old days and how I can be a better influence. I think about that a lot, but when I put it in perspective, it's like, oh, I just do things that I saw other men that I wanted to be like do, and I just do those. And we're so lucky. Like we train jiu-jitsu together. We've got these incredible coaches. You know, guys that are like, some guys that are young that are really successful, jiu-jitsu practitioners and competitors, and then we've also got the old guys there that are like in their 60s just whipping ass, right? And I look at them and I'm like, man, God, I can't wait to be that guy, you know? Teaching the young bucks how to do it and still being able to go. And I'm very privileged to be part of the craft boxing community, which is where we are right now, at our boxing club. And I do want to shout out my big brother George Foreman Jr., or George Foreman III, I should say, and what he built with craft boxing to create communities. It's open for everybody. We have the most incredible women boxers hanging out with us, but it's cool because I teach a lot, and we get people who come to the gym, never thrown a punch in their life, right? Like never. Just so, like we were talking about the guy at jiu-jitsu, like, and I've watched them. We've been open over a year now, year and a half, and there's people that I see that have come like a year ago, and they're just couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag, like just soft. And I'm not saying that as a derogatory way, because they wanted to be around an environment where they can harden themselves mentally and physically, right? And there's value in that, and we have to celebrate that. People that are, as we said, choosing struggle and showing up, and now you see them hitting the bag and moving, cracking the mitts, and it's like they're never going to fight. That's not the point. Right. But it builds a belief in themselves. It builds that value of hard work. It builds value and pride. Like we talk about, pride doesn't have to be narcissism. Like you should be proud when you bust your ass and you get something, even if you don't get the outcome that you want. The fact that you put in the work to go do it is something that you should be proud of. Right? And I think that it's cool. We're in a situation, both of us in the fitness industry in different capacities and martial arts, that we get to see people choose struggle to go through and develop, and everything takes hard work. And to bring it back, I know we were talking men's mental health stuff, but when it comes to like the mental health side of things and the depression, suicidality, no purpose, it's like you also, you said it really well about like band-aiding bullet wounds, right? Like we tend to just band-aid it and, oh, take this pill, take this antidepressant, take this, and it's like, I'm not criticizing that. I mean, we could criticize the hell out of that, but we're not going to get into that right now. But it's like, okay, but you started feeling this way for a reason. So let's start addressing that. Right? Like, and again, as I mentioned before, a lot of therapy in Western society is really heavily talk therapy based, which statistically speaking is really effective for women, because they can kind of express, they're much more used to expressing themselves. So they'll express themselves. They're comfortable to be emotional, be vulnerable. They're very comfortable being vulnerable emotionally, and they can express it. They can get it out. And in a lot of cases, speaking clinically, it's like they can express, get it out, and it's pretty good. Like then it's like, okay, how do we solve that problem? I got it out. I was able to express it. And sometimes they just need a space where they can express them. For whatever reason, they're not able to in their private lives. So therapy is so effective, but we're seeing a big trend in therapy just not being, traditional therapy is not being effective for men, because you get into a situation where you're just perpetually talking about your feelings. You're not finding solutions. The male brain is pretty solutions focused, purpose driven, as we said. So it's like, if I'm not getting an outlet of like, how do I fix this? Like I say this a lot, the purpose of therapy, any type of therapeutic intervention, should be and only be to undiagnose yourself, right? And people that doesn't even register with them. They're like, oh, I'm doing the work. It's like, okay, but there has to be an end result to undiagnose yourself. So if you're depressed, you want to be not depressed. If you're anxious, you want to be not anxious. I'm not saying that works 100, but there has to be, that's the goal of it, is not just to perpetually sit in your feelings and talk about the problems in the past and the reason you feel this way. It's like, how do we move forward so you're undiagnosed? How do you go from the obese client who's suffering all these horrible physical illnesses caused by that? It's like, well, we don't just work out to keep you the way you are, to say, well, we're doing something about it. It's like, well, no, we want to undiagnose the situation you're in. Right? If you have an injury, you want to repair it, which is undiagnosing that injury. So I think that that's an important factor that we have to really lean head into, right? And address from a therapeutic standpoint and a clinical standpoint. It is coming out more, for sure, but we have to, anybody involved in the clinical side needs to really seek to understand how we can get more men into therapy, or at least be open to the idea of it, and which I was not at all. And in fact, so there's also a big trend on, there's a very low compliance and follow-up rate, and people might take this out of context, but with men patients and female clinicians, right? So it can be an odd dynamic. There's an actual way higher success rate when it comes to interaction, like in a clinical setting of male to male. Right. So, I mean, for me, I have only worked effectively with male psychologists. Just personal preference.
Maybe like a common ground thing too. It's like, if anyone's going to get what I'm going through, this guy will.
Well, exactly. I mean, we both work in the fitness industry, and we've got plenty of women who are mothers that are like, hey, I want like a female trainer. I want somebody who can understand what it's like. Obviously, 100%. We encourage that, right? So, when it comes to therapy, for anybody listening that's going through that or looking to get through that, it's okay to take some test drives. Like, the first person you go to may not be the person. I very much had that experience.
I think too, like I went last year, I didn't really have like anything that I was specifically going for. There were some traits that I wanted to work on, mostly frustration. Like, I'm very quick to get frustrated because I'm not necessarily a perfectionist, but I want things to be held to a high standard.
Every perfectionist says that.
It's just a more perfect way to say it. But it was things, with my own, like my son was 1.5 at the time, and I could kind of see, like, when things weren't going the way I wanted them to, I was getting frustrated and taking it out closer to him, if not, on him, and I didn't want to do that. So I found someone who was also word of mouth reference, and they had been going to him for a couple of years, and they're like, just try him out, like, see what you think. And so when I went in, for me, similar age, which I think is kind of helpful too, and a male, and at the beginning it was mostly just like, we're just having a conversation, which I felt like, obviously, I never didn't feel unsafe at any point, but I felt safe to just like express myself for what I wanted to be there for. And I think what was interesting with him is that he actually gave me more like homework to do, where I had to take responsibility using the tools that he was going to give me, which is perfect, because just, for me, and probably for most guys, it's like, we want to like do it by ourselves, air quotes. But what he was doing is like, he was just guiding me doing it by myself in the right direction. So, for me, and I know for you too, like, we really think in kind of like flow charts. And so one of the things he told me to do, he was like, when a situation happens, write it down the way it happened, and then go back and see where you could have done something differently. Like, go back up the path and see if there's something else you could have done differently. And the next time that comes up, try that new path instead. And if that doesn't work, rewrite it again until you find a good solution. Because these problems are going to keep coming up. Your kid doesn't go to bed. Your kid throws food on the floor. You lose a client, whatever it is. You can make these kind of like paths. And for me, seeing it visually makes a big difference too, to be able to kind of narrow down, like, okay, this path works. Like, this is something we do in jiu-jitsu too. It's like, it's the exact same idea. I mean, I think a lot of guys think, at least in some way like that, whether they visualize
thought patterns.
Whether they visualize it like a flow chart or something else. But what was effective for me was that he gave me the responsibility to take it on myself to find a solution. So I went back a few times, and by the third or fourth time, he was kind of like, Joe, I think the system is working for you. If anything changes dramatically, reach out. You can always text or call me if you need me, but I think right now you are kind of in a good spot. And I know I agree with him.
How did that make you feel?
Maybe feel good.
Yeah.
But it just didn't feel like, what you'd see as a traditional psychotherapy session where you're laying on a couch. And I think the point I was trying to get at with that is that, like, if you are a man who would like to go and do some therapy, you should also educate yourself on the different types.
Yes.
Because it'll just help you narrow down, like, that search pattern of, well, I went to a psychotherapist and I felt like an idiot laying there on the couch. And they asked me, questions that I didn't even make sense to what I was talking about. Or I tried hypnotic therapy and I didn't even get hypnotized and it didn't work for me. So just taking a little bit of time to educate yourself on the different types of therapy that you can go into, that will just cut down the time on finding the right person for you too.
Yeah. First of all, one awesome, that's very big of you, and a big step to recognize that there was patterns in your own behavior and things you wanted to change. I mean, that's the first step. I know it sounds obvious and hokey, but honestly, man, like, good for you for recognizing that a lot of people don't want to accept that there's opportunities. Yeah. And then second part also, when you're talking about the flow, I just picture you like in your office with like the whiteboards. yeah, it's Goodwill Hunting.
Red string.
Yeah, tying it all up. Don't get mad here, get over here. But I think that's important is if you're going to go into any type of psychotherapy, whether it's with a counselor, even just going to group, right? Like if you can honestly Google like therapy groups in your city. They're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, that whatever it is, right? Women's groups, mothers groups, trauma groups, sexual abuse groups, like childhood violence, anything. There's groups for that, if you're comfortable doing that. So, which is also free. So you can just go to those things and just feel it out, like AA and things like that. And they have a lot of good value, right? Even if it's just meeting some people who are going through the same shit that you're going through, that alone has a lot of value.
Yeah, you'll at least have one thing in common with someone in the room.
Exactly, right? But then also, understanding, for me, like I never, talking to a counselor or something, like it doesn't have a ton of value for me. Nothing against I don't mean it them, I just mean that's not what I needed.
Yeah.
Right? I'm very solutions focused. I want an outcome. I want to undiagnose myself. So I had a great psychologist who does different types of like psychology therapy trainings. They're a little more in depth, a little more neuroscience based, right? Which to me is like, it's science based. Like talking to me isn't science. Like it is. Obviously it is. I do cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's like. But even that is rewiring your brain, your thought patterns, right? Rather than just, hey, I feel sad. Fair enough. But what's the solution? Are we just going to feel sad all day?
Yeah.
Is that what you need to do? And I think there's a bit much of that. Like, we're in an odd time when it comes to mental health stuff because we're at a time of in my estimation, the highest level of awareness, right? Like social media is just full of this, right? Self-care, all these things, which
is also self-diagnosing.
Lots of. First of all, it's being clinically depressed and having depression, or just feeling depressed because something didn't go well. Those are two different things. Being anxious is a completely normal human reaction. You're supposed to feel that way. Actually, quite often.
Having anxiety.
Yes, having an anxiety disorder is a different thing. So, yes, let's start there. But we're also creating more awareness, which is really good. But I think there's a lot of awareness for the sake of awareness and without solutions attached to it.
Without direction and solutions.
Yeah, it's like the whole, one of the things, man, it makes me nuts, which is a lot of things, but like it's okay to not be okay. It's like, well, who the fuck does that help? Like, yeah, of course it's okay to not be okay.
Now what?
Yeah, now what? It's like, oh, hey, Joe, you're not okay. That's okay. high five, and then I leave, and you're just like, well,
Still here.
still not okay. Thanks for making that acceptable, right? It's like, I don't need your approval to feel the way I'm feeling. I need a reasonable solution out of this.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, we're doing a good job of talking about things and, hey, the self-care stuff, but
I think with that specifically, you can't self-care your way out of it because you only have your perspective.
100%.
And you absolutely need someone else who has either guided other people through it or gone through it themselves and come out to a new perspective to really show you that there's another way out. Because
You're 100% right.
I mean, there's definitely lots of examples that we could make analogies towards, but
Yeah.
I think it just is pretty straightforward. That's like, you are in that scenario sort of stuck in a way, stuck in a vision, stuck in a perspective, and I know for a lot of men that they don't see a way out because they don't have another way to look at what they have. And what it takes is someone else to come in and just kind of crack that shell open a little bit so that you can go, oh, okay, maybe there is another way out of here, and I don't have to take the route that I was going to take. I can start to do this other thing. And I think because the like self-help section in the digital library has grown exponentially also in the last 5 years, that, and a lot of men want to take stuff on themselves, that they do think like, I can kind of read my way out of this. And it's good to have that information and that knowledge, but there's no reciprocal interaction. There's no one on the other side of that book saying to you, what do you think about that last phrase that I just wrote down?
Yeah.
Like, how do you connect to that? How can we change the direction? There's no conversation happening. It's great to get information in, but if there's no one challenging you on it or trying to shift your direction on it, you're going to just still be yourself in that shell, just taking in more information. There's no one steering you away.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's a gap right now when it comes to that stuff of like, I agree. So I'm going to speak both in my personal experience and a little bit clinically in some of my experience with other men going through suicidality, which I'm only referencing that because that's the extreme end of things, right? But you can't, as you said, you can't think your way out or read your way out of things when you're in the storm. Like, it's too late now. So one, all the self-development stuff and these skill sets that you can learn from parenting books, like, it's like, well, before you have the kids, start reading those parenting books, right? Yeah. Reading them when they're 5 is like, you've missed some steps.
They're in your arms screaming.
It's
right? Hard to read
Which chapter is it?
Parenting for Dummies.
Yeah, so but those are things I get a lot of, is people like, oh, well, I'm reading a book on meditation. It's like, listen, when you're suicidal, you can meditate all day. It's not going to change, because the voices that are happening inside, like, they're
quiet space.
Yeah, right. And so all these things, like, I think to myself, I was at that point the most successful I'd ever been in society and in life, financially, in a lot of ways. I had a family. I was living in my dream house. Like, I had everything that I could want. I was working out all the time. Like, I'm physically active. Like, people are like, oh, you're depressed, like, work out. 100%. But there's a tipping point.
One drop in the bucket.
Yes, exactly, right? And as you said, until I started getting outside perspectives of people who, one, had experience, 2, had an education that could give proper feedback. It's like the reason why people hire you. It's like, yeah, they could go online and watch videos, but they don't have the actual coach there to coach them on what the technique should be and the little tips, right? You and I aren't going to get our black belt by watching YouTube videos.
Right.
So, but it's the same thing when it comes to mental health. One, it takes an extraordinary amount of work. You have to want to get better. You have to genuinely want to get better, and you have to have a plan in place on how you're going to do that. With homework, with self-development included in therapeutic intervention, right? Whatever that means to you. So you have to have those things, because if you don't, as you said, if you don't have an external perspective, whether it's a clinician or a friend that's really giving that feedback on where you can take those things, the result isn't going to be effective in a lot of ways. that's a little general, but like, I need to know what I'm trying to, I hate the word fix because that's not applicable, but yeah, like what I'm trying to correct or what I'm trying to work on, right? What's my undiagnosed end? What do I want? What's my purpose? Right? Starting creating some of those things, but once you're in it, I don't want to say it's too late, but you can't, I can watch all the Jocko videos I want, but when I'm in that hell space, it's like, that's not going to get me out of here. Not, obviously Jocko's the man, I'm not criticizing his work, I'm just saying, but people, I think there's a little too much fluff in that. You know, like I don't need a life coach who's 22 years old who hasn't accomplished anything, but is calling themselves the CEO of their company and they're the only one in it. You know, like I just...
18-year-old business coach.
Yeah, but you see it all the time. It's like, and people are gravitating to like, oh, you know, get up at 5 a.m. and go for a walk and meditate for 2 hours and it's like, dude, you've got a kid at home. You're not meditating for 2 hours in the morning. You have a career.
I'm awake.
Exactly. Yeah, you are very awake. And I just think we need to create spaces that have solutions focused, especially when we're talking to men. Is like, what is the solution? What are you trying to undiagnose? What part of your life are you trying to improve? Who's responsible for that improvement? Which taking ownership over that is a huge deal. What are the reasons you're fighting for? I think that's, whether that's purpose, like a sense of community, a sense of family. I think you should have some responsibilities as a community that you're in. I think that's an important trait of being a good man, whatever, however you want to classify that. You have to have, an ethos. You have to know at least know who you don't want to be.
Yeah.
Start there. Who don't I want to be? What's a person that I wouldn't look up to?
Right.
Start there and just like work your way to the other end of that bell curve. Exactly, right? And I think that's important. And until we get into a space where we're giving those examples to be able to do those things and creating space where people can just talk about it, about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the failures that we have, I think that's another point too, is you and I and many other people, as I said, I've got some amazing mentors in my company that I really look up to. I've got mentors like George and other people around, but like we're very open about all the things we're not good at.
Right.
Like, constant failure, like constant, right? That's one nice thing about jiu-jitsu is like, holy crap, you're getting humbled all the time. All the time.
Every 5 minutes.
Every 5 minutes or so, right? So it's like, but when you get that context of it's okay to be not a failure long term, but it's okay to fail.
Yeah.
Other people are doing it. These are the things that you can get out of that. And you create that, and that we're able to talk about solutions and how we get things better, then I think that's, I don't want to say the way out of what we're facing right now, but it's a step in the right direction that actually has meaning behind it.
Yeah, one thing I was going to mention with leaders too is, as much as we looked up to these, people who we saw as like virtuous men, they never nailed it either. Like, all those coaches along the way, even, certain games or calls or how they interacted with people, they made lots of mistakes. But I think because you and I, and hopefully other guys too, had access to men like that, we are also able to see those failures and learn from them and say, like, I didn't like how he interacted with that person, I'm going to not do that. So by sort of process of exposure and elimination, we're able to say, like, well, maybe that's not a good person, or that's not a good response, and start to put together, what makes the most sense to me that actually creates that virtuous person, and then embody that. That's why someone like the Daily Stoic account is so popular, is because he's just reiterating things that really great men did. But do you think like Marcus Aurelius did make mistakes? Of course. He just didn't write them down in the book. He only wrote down the good stuff he did. But so you're just like reading his highlight reel. He just did a lot of good stuff, and had a lot of virtue, and to even listen to someone like that, even just to get examples of like, do you agree with that or not, and like, do you want to embody that or not? Those are sort of like our historical lifetime pinnacles of sort of what male virtue can be. And if you're going to read something, maybe that is something like, read the best example of it and see how that could work for you, rather than just kind of absorbing the next self-help book that comes out, because like we've talked about, it's like a lot of stuff is regurgitated content, and going back to a source might be a faster way to get to your own version of virtue.
I agree. I don't mean to interject. I think that there's value in reading, and like you said, there's certain things, not to give anybody new information, but Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, one of the most important books, anything by Seneca. One that I wish I read a long time ago was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. You want to understand human suffering, and you want to understand suffering in general, but that alone is going to be dramatically different in when it comes to your view on the world. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, I just think, I don't know, it's one of those things, right? I'm a big Stoic philosophy guy, but it's like, man, he figured it out, so just why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? It's like, he's got it figured out. And then, as I said, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning was, it's written more literary than a psychotherapy book. And just please do yourself a favor. It's a very short read. It's a very intense read. He was a Jewish psychotherapist who survived Auschwitz and Dachau. Pretty wild, and he's very open about the things he did and the people that survived, like what they had to do. He was kind of like no good person got out of there, right? In a traditional sense, and
people who had purpose,
yes,
had reason to get out.
Yeah, right. But they had to do things that they wouldn't love themselves for, to survive just the most horrific incident in human history. So. But that alone, that awareness of like understanding as you said, like there was traits that you had, and you might still have those traits, and that's okay, but at least you're aware of like, I have some toxic traits, air quote toxic. I certainly have toxic traits, but being aware of those things and being able to have an idea of how to get out of those. So the reason I brought up those books, and I know why you brought up Marcus Aurelius, is like, those are things that anybody has access to. And I think that's powerful, and I think there's certain things, and of course there's way more books and different things, but you can learn a lot from people who have figured it out, and I think experience is the greatest teacher. And so you got to qualify who you're listening to, really qualify the people that you're following, the people that you're listening to, and then seeking out, as you said, finding at least what I don't want to be. I think there's so much value in that, and especially when we look at different opportunities. I was asked a question at a talk I was a part of, and the man came forward and he said that he was confused a little bit, not confused, but like traditional male values. He was what would be considered a little bit more feminine. He's like, I'm not like a masculine man, but I like being a man. Like, what is that? But I'm not, I'm not going to go
grow a beard and
and he's like, I'm not going to jiu-jitsu or whatever, right? And I want people to understand too, in all of our conversation, nothing that I'm talking about means you have to go play sports and you have to go do those things. Those are just our route to finding out who we were and how I think there's a lot of value. And as you said, the guy we train with, like, you can pick that up at any time and you can change those things. But it doesn't have to be traditional male values or gender roles or anything like that. That's less, and I think that's where the conversation gets stuck, is people are like, oh, well, you're talking about like everyone has to work out and everyone has to do this. And it's like, I truly don't think that.
No.
Like, you could be a computer analyst who does live in the basement and still be a good, virtuous man, right? Or whatever, insert whatever, right? It's like, but you have to have a set of core values. You have to have things that you live with a principle. And the only way to find that out is to have true diversity of thought, to be able to expose yourself to multiple things you might not agree with or that you might not like. That's okay, but at least you know that's not the avenue you want to go down, right? And there's so much value, and I think we're just, again, getting into a bit of silos when it comes to those things, and back to our original as we wrap up here, our original discussion on why we're talking about spaces for men's mental health and how that works, it's like, until we can create space to openly talk about that, then that at least is like a beacon in the dark of people like, hey, I can listen to this, or that's going to help me get other ideas, or I'm listening to that and I don't like that at all.
Yeah.
All good.
Right?
Like,
narrow it down.
Yeah, at least you're narrowing down your focus on what those mean. So, but yeah, without the space to have open, honest conversation and true diversity of thought, and when I say true diversity of thought, I mean, I'm happy to sit in a room with people I couldn't disagree more with. Because there's something in everybody's point that has value, or at least why they came there.
Yeah.
Right? And you can learn a lot from other people. You don't have to agree with them.
And their point doesn't need to be silenced either. Like,
of course.
Like better conversations, or better information leads to better conversations.
100%.
I think too, with a lot of these, just what's annoying, I'll say, is that just as humans, we always try to put things in like 0 or 1 categories.
Sure.
So it's like you're a man or you're not manly. Well, Mick Jagger is probably one of the manliest men who weigh 110 pounds and has probably never seen a barbell in his life.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. It's not about that. But, for him, in that example, it's like he's passionate, he has purpose, and he has confidence in everything that he does.
Yeah.
And I think, you can be a man and in any space, and if you can keep working on those 3 things, those are going to be driving forces that make you more of yourself.
Yeah.
And the earlier examples we gave of like men who could stand up and speak clearly and hold their point for whatever their virtue is, or whatever their ethos is. And again, like, you could do anything, but you do have to have some passion, some purpose, and some confidence with that thing that you're doing to drive that home. And that's where these spaces have become unsafe, we'll say, is when some of these traits that aren't really valuable get thrown onto people in general, because we're putting them in a 1 or a 0 category, and we say, well, just man up, or just grit through it, or just put your head down, right? These are like things that have been pushed on all men, whether you're on one end of the gradient or the other, and it's not going to work. Just like a therapist for me is not going to work the same for you. Just like whatever. There's lots of examples. Don't need more of them, but by taking or working on narrowing your vision based on things either you don't want to be or you do want to be, you can start to find the system that works for you to come to your best solutions. And I will make a fitness analogy, because that's, it's the same thing. It's like you could have 10 men, will stay on topic, walk in the gym, and each of them needs a totally different approach to their health, fitness, and wellness. And that's the exact same thing for their mental health too.
Yes.
What works for one is not going to work for the other. So educating on what's available, narrowing down to what's going to work for you, testing and trying things out. And then I would just kind of finish off that with anything we do, if we can have a coach, and maybe that's a better reframe for most men, instead of having a therapist, you have a coach guide you, you are going to get to solutions much faster.
Yes.
Like 80% faster.
Yes.
Because, and we'll keep the fitness analogy going, it's like I can read all the books, I can watch all the videos, I can come and work out, I can start moving in the right direction, and I might get all the way to my goal, but I will definitely get to my goal faster if I have a coach who knows how to get me to that end result that I'm going for. And so if you can cut down that time frame, that is crucial when you're on this trajectory to suicide as the extreme. If we can cut down the time to get you moving in the right direction, it's not help, it's guidance.
Yes.
And looking around to find someone who, they can have a figurative whistle around their neck, but they're going to be the one that just cuts down the time and efficiently gets you to your undiagnosed end result. That's what we want to do. And that's why I wanted to have you on. That's why we need to create more safe spaces, is to get more men in a terminal that's going to move them in the direction that they need to go.
Absolutely.
So that's why we're here.
Yeah, man, it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, obviously, I'm very fortunate to have you as a friend, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to come on and talk. And you're doing a lot of really cool things, man, and it's cool to be a small part of that, at least for an episode. And yeah, thank you for making the space, right? For using your platform and ability to create these kind of conversations. And I know sometimes they're uncomfortable for people, but that's where growth comes from, right? And I think if we're hammering home a couple last points, is just, find what your principles are, right? Core values are the things you stick by, even if it costs you money. So you have to have a hill to die on. You have to have something that might be your family, that might be your career, like whatever it is. But you got to have those principles. You got to find what those are, or at least find what they're not. And then when it comes to for anybody listening that's going through anything, is it's okay to feel the way you're feeling. It's okay. Again, that hokey, it's okay to not be okay. But what I mean by that specifically is that it's not uncommon. You're not alone in those feelings. Don't feel shame. That's very common, specifically for men. Don't be ashamed of the way you're feeling. Don't be ashamed that you're struggling, that there's a way out. I'm living proof that there's a way out, right? Doesn't mean it gets easier. Doesn't mean it wasn't impossibly, literally the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, which is saying something. But there's a way out, man. There really is. And one thing I say on every podcast or opportunity I have to talk is that the voice that's telling you the voice that's saying those things, that you're not good enough, the voice that's saying that you should end it, the voice that's saying those things is lying to you. That voice is a fucking liar, man. You can't listen to it because it doesn't want what's best for you. So just every time you hear that voice, know that it's lying to you. And yeah, man, just thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and chat and hang out and see you on the mats.
Yeah. Thanks, Eddie. We'll put in the show notes a few areas that people can look for help if they need it.
Absolutely.
And can obviously follow along. We'll keep adding more content around this subject because it's valuable and important to talk about. And that's it. Thanks, man. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today as we explored the complexities of men's mental health and suicide prevention. Remember that you are not alone and there is always support available. If you or someone you know needs help, please don't hesitate to reach out. In Canada, contact Crisis Services Canada at 1-833-456-4566 or text 45645. In the United States, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available at 1-800-273-TALK. or text hello to 741-741. Your well-being matters, and seeking help is a brave and essential step towards healing. Take care of yourself and those around you. Once again, thank you for listening to today's episode. We'll catch you on the next one.